Naiyya, what's your take?
I mean, you absolutely can and you should, right? Let me sort of step back a little bit, right? See, community is an emerging, very emerging field, right? Very emerging segment, and it's a mix of both art and science, which is what makes it so. How do you, for instance, measure empathy, compassion in your community managers? You just cannot, right? And those could be very strong, sort of what you look for traits in your community team and your community leaders. But how do you really measure it? How do you quantify it? Very tough to, right? But what you can quantify, therefore, is how does your community grow? Right, and what are people when you run the NPS scores or when you run sort of surveys, etc., what are the adjectives people use when they describe the community feeling that they get? And when you look at that, that is quantitative data that tells you the emotion your community conveys based on how your community managers running that community, right? So that's just one small micro example. But with communities, I think the big thing is that because it's so much of an art and science, plus I think the business case for communities is still getting established globally. It becomes even more imperative on us founders to establish and to find these proof cases of where communities added business value. Let me give you two very quick examples. When we started building Baby Chakra and we said we're going to be community first, right? Um, Not just like my communities team, but I had to evangelize community building and the investments I was doing to build communities out to my board and to my investors, right? Today, I'm seeing that sort of effect play out because we are launching Baby Chakra products, and things like simple things like the brand recall, the brand trust, the brand ROAS on even performance campaigns, right? All of that is not that of a new brand at all. People already trust and people already know the brand. So the ambition we have today when we launch our products is exponentially higher than if you were a new sort of D2C play in the market, right? So that's just one example of how this has sort of impacted our business outcomes. And I think the second thing is around how, when you think about building a community, who's also becoming your evangelist, right? And that is a very, very important piece of that entire sort of community journey, right? And I think how you measure evangelism is the other sort of metric I'll talk a little bit more about, but that's extremely important, both to community sort of platforms as well as sort of D2C brands, which is what we've sort of got both sort of parts of the play on today. So I'll tell you more, but I mean, that's like a very broad level, high level sort of segue into the question.
Awesome. So according to Naiyya, it's about measuring what just the community doesn't feel, but also in terms of growth numbers. So while we hear it from Nipun on what is Nipun's take on if communities can really be measured, I would love for all the audiences to put it into the chat. What metrics are you currently measuring for your community? Nipun, over to you.
Thanks, Ritu. Think I'm a hardcore data guy myself. So like I'll be very very rude, but I think there shouldn't be anything done if it cannot be measured. And I've grown myself as a community builder who has data as the core of defining what we do. And I'll give you few examples. So at Curify, we were not doing it in the early days because we didn't know in general what to do with data, and I'm talking about the first few months. But very very soon we I think we became OKR led, and then OKR went into everything. And this is very very useful if you guys have not read about OKR philosophy. I think it can be applied everywhere. I am someone who tries to apply OKR for my personal life as well. So I feel if it can be done by someone at an individual level, and I'm not like one of the rare people, like you'll see a lot of people who do that. It can be done with communities as well. So we have done that at Curify, we have done that at LikeMinds, and I think measuring things is a way to navigate decisions, and it's always useful to navigate decision with certain data without as compared to without having a data. You can always go with emotions, but if you're not measuring it, you are not using the right arsenal to take the decisions. So while a lot of EQ driven and a lot of emotional driven decisions can be taken, but if you have data, you should always account for it.
Awesome. Use it to navigate decision making. So now that we've set the context of why we need to measure communities and that it is possible, my next question obviously is, how do you identify which business goals does the community align to? At the end of the day, a community can't, it can't always generate revenue directly, it can't always reduce cost directly. So, what numbers should ideally the community teams should own up and say, hey, this is my number. I'm going to drive this number. This is my responsibility. Nipun, what's your take? You built out Curify, you're building out LikeMinds, right? What do you see as that business being? Which vertical?
I I think in fact, I have a whole lot of slides on this if you want me to present, but I'll keep it narrow. I feel at every stage of the company you have different metrics as a company, and especially if you're working at a startup, your priorities for every quarter changes as an organization. And I think community teams today need to be that agile that they can contribute to the objective of the overall organization in some way or the other. While I think everyone understands this, that community building is a long term exercise, it takes at least 6 to 12 months to even start showing tangible results. But even if, let's say, 2 out of 10 actions that we as community builders take can be measured and flow back into the main objective of the organization, it helps a lot. So for example, if the organization is heavier on the acquisition side, you should always go for certain metrics which can contribute towards that. So for example, it could be number of new members acquired via events, or if you are a fairly larger community, you can start seeing organic mentions on social media. You can start seeing metrics like how many new chapters are being opened. So for example, what CMX is doing here, it's a great way to acquire new members. For the first time I'm here, Naiyya is here, I'm sure a lot of others are also here. Then if you are at the stage of every stage actually, the whole growth funnel, right from acquisition, which I just described, you can go to activation, you can go to retention, you can go to referrals, you can go to revenue. I think so. The answer is how product management is evolved. You cannot ask a product manager today that what is the metric that you are focusing on as a team. It always have to be with the context of the organization. And I think the better community teams start doing that, I think they'll the faster they'll get a seat on the table for decision making.
Seat on the table is something that I'm going to come to in a bit. But what you just mentioned about product managers and the evolving state of the community and the business, it reminds me of this particular blog I read by somebody who actually kickstarted product management as a vertical at Microsoft. And she used to say product management is like the motor between the bricks. It needs to keep flowing. There's no consistent one thing that you do. And that really set me thinking that, hey, you know what? That's probably what when community builders today are doing.
Yeah.
My next question, Naya, on these lines is for you. And I have to ask this question to you, right? For very obvious reasons. What do you think is a community's North Star metric? Because isn't a North Star metric supposed to be that one consistent metric, while at the same time the community is working to achieve different, alignments of the business at the same time? So how do you sort of set that balance for the community team? That this is your North Star metric, but at the same time, there are multiple metrics that you're going to be achieving along the way.
So, Ritu, since you've been at Baby Chakra and you've built out Baby Chakra as well, the North Star metric for us has always been trust, right? And we actually have a trust equation at Baby Chakra. And for those who are not familiar with the trust equation at Baby Chakra, it basically has 4 ingredients. It's actually like a formula, right? So one is about social proof. The second is about transparency. The third is about credible, personalized conversations, right? And the last one that we started talking about is a no compromise on care, right? So these are the 4 elements of our trust equation. So even before we launched products, right, the mission and the vision behind Baby Chakra was how do you become the trusted care platform for all parents and children in India, right? And therefore this trust equation. Now, if you remember, and just sharing with folks who are new here, right? every metric, so of course, like it's a given that when you're building a community, community is team, community is content team, community is product, and community is tech, right? And community is business in the different pieces, right? But product and community teams are best friends because they know they need each other very much. And hence, in all our sort of community journeys, and when we were identifying cohorts, right, and sort of like creating our product journeys for cohorts, at the highest level, we basically said, okay, maybe for some cohorts, we were at a more advanced stage. I think what Nipun talked about, right? Maybe like, we have more expecting mothers than most, right? So there, maybe the social proof is not, the part of the trust equation, right? Maybe social proof is not as much needed. Maybe what's needed is the credible conversations, right? So we'd go back and we'd say, okay, conversations, let's onboard experts, let's change the dynamic of the community by changing the nature of the participation, right? So we'd get in more sort of doctors into the mix, right? Let's create more personalization. So invest more on some of the single user utilities like daily tips, or like, let's say, a pregnancy tracker, right? So again, when you're looking across your cohorts, you have to stay true to what your North Star is, which is for us trust. And then you break it down into saying, at the highest level, for every cohort, what is the problem statement I want to solve for through product thinking, through community thinking, and how do I break it down based on, the first piece being engagement retention, second being product-led growth, third being conversion journeys, right? Depending on if you want to do community to commerce, etc. So that's how we approach the entire problem statement for us. And of course, it's very different by cohort, like I just emphasized, right? Now, when we're acquiring doctors, for instance, on expecting mothers, like, to make that cohort full of credible conversations, the doctor's journey takes on a different community lens, right? So there it's more about an acquisition-led journey versus, let's say, an engagement / retention / sort of credible conversations-led journey, right? So there we're looking at more product-led growth. So that's how we approach this entire sort of, piece around community at Baby Chakra. We break it down brick by brick, and we look at each brick in terms of how that fits into your overall trust equation.
Awesome. So, just taking a step back and sort of, because when I'm also processing while you're saying this, right? So we have a North Star metric, which is consistent. And then as the business strategies are evolving across personas, because communities are heterogeneous, and every persona's needs are also constantly evolving. I remember, our marathon discussions also on the fact that a community constantly needs to evolve as its members, otherwise members will drop off, the churn is higher. So again, bringing in retention as one of those pieces. Eventually, at the end of the day, if you look at it, then at the community level, you're talking about input metrics and output metrics to achieve North Star metrics. So Nipun and Naiyya, both of you, in your current communities, what would you define as an input metric and what would you define as an output metric? Because often that line is quite blurred, because one output could become an input for another larger metric also. How do you prioritize between metrics?
Should I go first?
Go for it, Nipun.
So, for me, it's very, very simple. I feel if you can achieve a number just by putting in effort without the community, getting involved at all, for me, that's an input metric. So, number of events conducted could be an input metric. Number of members spoken to one-on-one could be a one-on-one, could be an input metric. Number of posts that the community team seed into let's say the community is an input metric for me. But the more important ones are the output metric, right? Where these are not completely controlled by the team, so the same example, right? So instead of number of events conducted, it should be number of attendees, or even more important, number of attendees who stayed till the end, in an event, or maybe how many repeat attendees are you able to get. So these are in a way output metric. And the way to do that, to really nail the output matrix, is you define and target an output metric. You think of multiple input metrics that may affect that output metric. Then you apply those efforts to go into an input metric and see how much the output metric is moving, and then try to predict whether the input metric is actually is affecting the output metric enough or not. Else you move to a different input metric. So that's how we think about input and output metrics in general.
Interesting, very interesting take on that. Naya, what's your take on input and output? How would you ask all the community builders out here to prioritize between them and focus on them?
So Ritu, I think the biggest challenge of communities, every metric is so exciting for, especially for someone who's really passionate about community building, right? So I think when we started building out communities, we had like some 60, 70, 80 metrics we were tracking, and everything was like so exciting to see insights, movements, trends, and like talk about it and say, oh, how do we do this? And everything was on priority, right? So the biggest thing I think I have learned along this journey is that every quarter to every 6 months, right? Again, depending on the cohort of users you are tailoring to and your North Star business metrics, set maybe 2 or 3 output metrics and outcome metrics. Don't set more than that, right? So, just to give you a sense, in let's say a toddler mother cohort at Baby Chakra, right? We have realized it's an extremely beautiful cohort for us to see community to commerce journeys on. There, my input metric is how do I do some activities, but my outcome metric is how do I grow that base of toddler mothers out, right? So my growth is my outcome metrics there, and the secondary outcome metric there is the monetization, the community to commerce journey, right? So that is for my toddler mother core. I just have two. Can I get more of them? Can I get more of them to buy, right? And my input metrics would map backwards from the outcome metrics. Let's say with an expecting mother, I don't have products for expecting mothers today, right? But I'm in the business of care, right? That is my mission. So there I basically want to ensure that what can I give to them is a very safe, a credible environment for them to ask their questions and for them to get the best care, so they actually have behavior change, right? They actually they make the right nutrition decisions, they make the right prenatal care choices, right? So my outcome metric there is not a commerce oriented, right? I have two metrics there. Are they seeking care when they need it from a qualified healthcare practitioner or from an expert on our platform? So it could be through Q&As, or they to their own doctor that they go and visit. And number two, am I influencing behavior change? So then we run the qualitative and quantitative survey saying, listen, did we help you improve your prenatal behaviors? Are you starting to eat healthy? Are you taking your folic acid? Right? So across the teams, what we're really trying to emphasize is just stick to two outcome metrics, because otherwise it's just too distracting for everyone concerned. And then the teams work to ensure that happens. Listen, I'm still one of the most distracted people you'll find, because community is so exciting. Right? And Arpit's on call is probably nodding his head. But I think that's what we are basically now aligning closer and closer to. So let's just focus on these, on two outcome metrics and really, really nail the hell out of them over a quarter or over 6 months, however long it takes.
What's really amazing in this conversation that's coming out is prioritization clearly, which means we as community builders need to learn the art of prioritizing. We can't be doing it all. Two, something very nice that you mentioned, and probably we should dip a little deeper into it. Another conversation, another session is behavioral change. How do you measure what behavior change can a community influence? So, Neha, let's earmark this. Naya, we're booking you for another calendar month. We have to talk about behavior change in community. All
But
right.
please don't put messages in the chat box saying completely agree, Naya. But that's the thing, right? Building community, especially people like us, right? Who are all of us, we're here because we are passionate about communities, right? The business case for communities is still getting established globally. In fact, we're doing a couple of calls this week to talk to people who monetize communities very effectively, right? At different brands, etc. But it's a passion that each of us have. And therefore, we want to ensure we always do the right thing by everyone we serve, which is impossible to do.
True.
So, yeah, prioritization for sure.
I'll just highlight one more thing that both Nipun and Naya did mention, right? When they are looking at input and output metrics, if you realize what they shared, they also spoke about growing the top of the funnel and then bringing the funnel into it, right? Whether it was growth and hence care, growth of the community, more people in that persona being retained and hence acting on a certain behavior. something that, and I think this calls for all of us to dig deeper into the community that we're building, because this would differ from community to community, that behavior. And I think what works for probably Baby Chakra or for LikeMinds or for Quora, Mensa or Next Sleep or any other community may not work for another community. So I think, one takeaway for all of us is, let's not get influenced by every conversation that we hear about metrics, but actually try and see what's really applicable to us. Yeah. On that note, I'm going to now come up with a different set of questions, because we figured out what we want to measure, why we want to measure, how do we prioritize. We've differentiated between input and output metrics. Now let's talk about the tricky, the messy part. Right? How do you really go about measuring these metrics? Because one, people hate math. It's numbers, there's Excel sheets, there's pivot tables, there's VLOOKUP involved. There are a bunch of tools available, which each one comes with their own language. It's a lot of team time that goes into it. If only one person owns looking at these numbers, the others in the team will clearly start avoiding it. And as a team, everybody should focus on numbers. So, Naiyya and Nipun, you guys, again, been there, done that. I'm sure you've heard a lot from your respective team members. Nipun, you keep hearing that from your clients also currently, that listen, how can we make looking at community metrics really exciting and fun? How do you make it fun?
I think the simplest advice would be to to hire an analytics guy, and like block at least like 10 hours for that guy. I'm assuming you're running a brand led community in that. But if you're not, I think go for simpler numbers, especially if you're early in your community journey. Just start with things like number of power users, number of people who are coming back, number of people who I speak to on a regular basis. So like in any early community, volunteers are very very key. For late as well, but early, like you don't have enough resources, right? So how many volunteers are you able to excite with your mission? Very very simple numbers, and you don't need to calculate like anything on this, right? As you mature, you can start measuring things like events. There are a lot of beautiful tools out there for hosting events, where you don't need to do this calculation bit. And as you mature, you can always go to a community platform. And now there are very very interesting tools out there who would help you in analyzing metrics. If you're running a Slack community or a Discord community as well, there are tools you can use on top of them, right? So like I think there is enough being done to actually help you guys find these numbers. So my advice there would be talk to a lot of peers, talk to a lot of people. What tools are they using in their community, and especially find someone who is at a similar stage in a similar business at yours. So I often ask this question to some of the people who I invite in my events. So I remember, Shelton, in the same event as you, I asked him, and he told me that he speaks a lot, often with Om from Growth School, and you could say, those guys are in a way competitor as well, but not really, right? The industry is so big, and it's always useful to have those discussions with your peers. So my number one advice would be to talk to your peers in terms of what tools are they using, and the right peers. So yeah.
No, I absolutely agree. I think Om, Shelton, a bunch of us, Madhurima here, then there's Anna. I mean, I think it's very essential for folks to come together and exchange notes. Every community serves a very different target audience. Even if it's similar, I think it's a really large pie for all of us. Naiyya, what do you think would make life easy for community builders who are worried to get into this whole number crunching space, right? What would be your recommendations? How would you, in fact, even recommend them to talk about these numbers?
So I think most teams are a composite of different parts and expertise. Right now, it's like, I think I say this often, like if you expect a fish, and I don't say this, I mean, I think Newton said this, right? But I say this often to everyone, which is that if you expect a fish to climb the tree, it's going to fail, right? So why would you expect someone? And I'm not saying that all community managers or leaders are similar, but there might be some who maybe don't, like, maybe for them data is not a strong point. Maybe they get conversations, how to engage people in conversations, maybe how to acquire more people a lot more intuitively than some other people, right? Maybe that's your strength. So, or maybe your strength is data, right? I don't know. But I think eventually, see, teams are a function of different expertise. So, if you feel that, and by the way, data is going to be the lifeblood of everything community. So you will need someone strong in data, right? So I think one thing, you'll have to have a very frank chat with the founder, or if you're the founder yourself, frank chat with yourself, saying, listen, data is not my strong suite. I need to get a BA, like a business analyst in, who can basically, look at the data dashboards, set them up for me. If you're working, if you have your own proprietary product, right, which we did at Baby Chakra, right, thing that kept on running parallelly was the analytics stack, right? So we had, of course, like Amplitude, which was sort of the backend stack for all our app engagements and events. And we had sort of all the events mapped out that were important to us. Periscope was a data visualization platform, because for people who are not familiar with even like sort of running SQL queries and trying to get like insights from that, they could just go to Periscope. They could ask the tech team, hey, can you help me set out these charts so I can see how things are trending. See, trends are easy to see, right, if you have data visualization on them, right? So I think that's really how I would answer this question. See what your strengths are. You need data, you need the insights, and also more importantly, you want to know the impact of your work. So just figure out how you can mobilize the team around you, mobilize the founder as well, and sort of play to your strengths there.
So, this reminds me of advice I received once that, listen, when you're hiring, hire for all the things that you don't know, won't do, or can't do. Don't hire for folks who are exactly like you. So, very bang on. And yes, Naya, I mean, I do believe that the tech stack, the analytics stack at BB Chakra was a gold. Spoiled most of us out here when we didn't have access to those tools eventually later. We got teams to build it for us. But yeah, so folks, in the audiences, keep your questions going because we're going to start the Q&A session in just a bit. I have only two more questions because then it's going to be between you, Naya, and Nipun. I'm just going to be enabling this conversation further on. My next question is, um, when we look at data, we look at a lot of numbers, and that data is compared day on day, week on week, quarter on quarter. But I think one challenge that I have also come across very often is, how do you draw insights from these numbers? What do you look out? Because numbers look all the same. Day on day, they'll barely grow. Week on week, there'll be some change in numbers. Month on month, it's substantially, whether it worked, it didn't work. But at the end of the day, how do you draw insights? Nipun, do you want to take that up? You're smiling. I'm sure you have something on your mind.
Actually, like the reason why I'm smiling is some of the things that you say is not obvious, seems obvious to me because probably I'm a lot more data oriented person. I think I've grown into one. But to answer your question, I think seeing data is a skill, and there is no either you pay for a software, but even like paying for a software will require you to tell the software what you want to measure, right? So it's a skill that none of us can evade. While hiring someone is always a good idea, but it's like if you give cat exam, they also ask you to do maths, clear maths. So it's something I don't think we can run away from. Some of the basic things, I can tell for sure. Don't look at data, look at movements in the data, to see trends, right? Then the other way is try to predict positive changes, with stories in mind. You can think of, let's say, hey, we are trying to make this impact. So for example, let's say we are trying to make our events more resourceful. uh, can we create content that is being shared? And Ritu, you guys do it very very awesomely and often on Next Leap, right? So a metric to do that has to be defined, right? How do you really figure that problem out, whether it is being solved or not? So one of the metric could be, how many people are sharing the learnings on LinkedIn, right? Now measuring that should not be difficult, right? So I think measuring is the easier part. The tougher part is what matrix to set, and that is where the whole skill of being analytical comes in. And how do you time, certain output that you want with a metric that can be measured. Those would be my 2 cents on it. Of course, a lot more can be done. A very very simple example and a very popular example of this is, in the early days, Facebook had this huge data exercise to measure who are the people who were retaining in the community. And very interesting and simple answer was, the people who would have 10 friends in I think 7 friends in 10 days or vice versa would get retained. Now this was something that came out of data. It was but there was always an intent behind it, that who are the people who are sticking around. And then they did a lot of data crunching and came back with that. In fact, at Curify, we also followed a similar this thing, and we came up with this number that, and this is called activation. So we came up with a number that, if a member participates in 2 cases within their first week, they would, like, our members were doctors, so they would stay on the platform. So I think you'll find enough examples out there today to directionally see what data to look at. But you need to have that intent on what is it that you want to move, what is the story that you want to move.
Awesome. Naya, do you think then a good way to look out for patterns, trends, insights would actually be going one step behind and setting up the hypothesis for the community and then taking up the metrics? What's your take?
So you always, I mean, I come from a consulting background, right? So, I mean, for me, everything is problem solving and hypothesis led approach. When you're starting off a company, it's a hypothesis that something will happen and something will happen, right? With the team and with like the mission. So everything is hypothesis driven. So certainly I think, however, I think what also I learned at consulting was how do you frame the hypotheses, right? It can't be like a broad, open-ended hypothesis. They're very bounded hypotheses based on the phase of business you're in, with certain assumptions built in, right? Maybe 3 core assumptions that you build in and 3 core activities you will do to test those assumptions out. And Ritu's smiling because like she's probably remembering and recalling these conversations. But it's extremely critical to begin with a bounded hypothesis, a very sharp set of assumptions, a very sharp set of activities, because you can get very easily distracted. I think the second piece that I would want to say is that while you're testing out your hypotheses, I think Nipun said this, right? Look for the trends. But there are also certain things that are also things that might put you off. And let me give you an example. And Neha, Ritu, you might more remember this, right? So there was this period in time at Baby Chakra where we were very driven by growth numbers. And I remember Neha and Ritu and Asha, who was also helping us with community, coming back and saying, Naya, quality over quantity, quality over quantity. And I remember saying, no, quantity first. Let's build our base and it'll happen. Like we'll figure out, we'll build along the way for quality. Hand on heart, when I look back, right, I was making the worst mistake of my life in building a community because I was focusing on growing out quantities of community members versus focusing on saying, okay, can I, communities are very fragile ecosystems, right? Can I build out the quality of the existing community and then sort of and it'll not like this community that I build out, the fragile ecosystem for may not necessarily lead to the growth of the other community. I might have to grow out the other community from scratch. But again, fragile ecosystem. So do I build a fragile ecosystem number 2, fragile ecosystem number 3, fragile ecosystem number 4, right? And really ensure depth of quality of engagement and trust and credibility, right? In each of these fragile ecosystems and disparate ecosystems in many ways, right? I think I've learned a lot through that experience, and not to also, by the way, expect communities to engage with each other because they may not actually find value in doing that. And that, by the way, is the future of communities as I see it. I mean, my big bet is on extremely hyper personalized micro communities of high trust and high belonging. I do not think communities are a one size fit all game at all. They are not an audience game. An Instagram page is not a community, it is an audience page, right? And that is my biggest attempt at evangelizing and telling people that communities are by themselves fragile ecosystems, and you have to ensure nourishment and high quality engagement in each one of them. And that, by the way, can only happen through product, data, and tech. So yeah, so I think that's my long answer to your question, Ritu. But that's really where I come out on this one.
No, absolutely so bang on. Yes, micro communities is the next. It's right here. We're beginning to realize it in consumer behavior today across businesses also. But it was and I think this is a massive key takeaway for everyone out here. Guys, don't assume that DAOs and MAUs, daily active users and monthly active users, is your starting metric. That's top of the funnel. Work on the hypothesis. What is it that you really want this community to do? That is your metric, and that's clearly what is emerging with everything that Nipun and Naiyya have shared. I want to take a little break out here. I want you guys to process. I want you guys to all put in your questions in the chat. And while that is happening, let's have our first raffle. So, Naiyya and Nipun and everybody out here, we do this really fun raffle. We spin the wheel, and two lucky folks today, one now, one after the Q&A section, will actually receive a original CMX goodie bag. So I'm quite excited about it because I still haven't had my hands on it, and somebody out
Are
here
we,
is
are we also part of it?
I know. I was going to say, can we also please enter the raffle?
we will see what happens on spin the wheel. So, folks, in the meanwhile, while Neha is setting up the spin the wheel, I want you guys to put in your questions because we're going to take questions from the chat, or we may ask you to also unmute. So, just keep the questions going. Neha, over to you. Tell us more about the raffle. You're on mute, girl. Neha, you're still on mute.
Still
So,
on
while Neha figures this out for us, we'll keep the questions going.
Sorry. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Neha,
No, not the
no,
screen. We
Neha,
can.
we can't see. Have you shared screen? Because we haven't.
Yes, I did. Just give me a second again.
Sure. Awesome. Guys, I'll be honest, as all events, synchronous virtual events go, we also struggle a lot of times with different platforms. We keep experimenting things. So don't mind us. But I think you guys all have gone through similar journeys, right? Where things are mute, unmute, and there's a whole lot of stuff happening. Well, this is how it is.
I am sorry, guys. I think there is a tech bug. I am not able to share the screen.
All right. So why don't we take a few questions while Neha or Mani, you guys can figure this out?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. So let's see, what questions do we have? Let me just scroll up. First come, first basis. Guys, give me a sec. Righto. So this is an interesting question by Eduardo. He asks us, which channels do you use in your community? Do they have different metrics to extract? Which channels of the community should you use to measure metrics? Nipun, Naiyya, anyone? You guys want to take that up?
Sorry, what do you mean by channels? Like,
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
I'm just going to ask him to unmute. Eduardo, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Yep.
I'm sorry about my accent. I'm from Brazil, so if something please ask. But what I meant is like Slack. Which channel do you use in your community and the metrics in each of them? Do you have a proof one of those or something like this?
Nipun, you want to take this?
So, honestly, we don't use Discord and Slack, but we use like our own software. But luckily, we also have a similar structure where you can have micro communities for different topics in your community. So the way we look at it is, of course, each channel in your case is itself a sub community, right? So whatever is valid for the whole community is valid for each sub community. Of course, different channels also have different objectives when you start that channel. Look for whether that objective is being achieved or not. And I would like one of the things that I've seen, a lot of people advocating is don't often start a lot of channels. Start with less channels. See if they are working well. Once your existing channels are on autopilot, then you go for the next one. I don't know if I was able to answer directly, but a lot of it will depend on what community are you building, what niche do you have.
Yeah. No, I can take it next as well. I wanted Nipun to pitch his product there, so I think he did a good job. But at Baby Chakra, I talk about this watering hole construct a lot, right? Which is, where is your audience and where is your community likely to be naturally? So I think that could be a great starting point as you start building out your community, right? So for instance, when we started Baby Chakra, the it was mothers, right? Women. And at that point in time, Facebook was a natural watering hole for them. So we said, okay, can we build out a Facebook page and a Facebook group for to at least get the first community cohort in? So that was our channel that we continue to sort of build out today. But that was the initial acquisition channel. Then we said, okay, but parenting and pregnancy is such a hyper personalized product journey. So how do you build that out? So we had to create our own tech stack. But of course, even in the tech stack that we built out, which is personalized and is pretty much been built out scratch for a parenting pregnancy use case, we've been able to integrate a bunch of solutions, right? So for instance, our chat is built on Firebase as one example, right? Or for instance, our commerce stack is something that we have at the group as a proprietary commerce stack. So that's an integration that we've done. So I think, again, to Nipun's point as well, I think it depends a lot on what you want to build and who do you want to build for. Start with a lowest friction sort of acquisition watering hole, but eventually, if you really want to have high quality engagement, you might want to move them to something which really sort of customizes to your journeys that you want to see play out.
I hope that answers your question. I'm just going to add one thing here that I've actually learned from Naiyya herself, right? It's what people, how many people are active in your community, and the ones who are active, what are they actually doing in your community? If you can measure who's active and what behavior are they showcasing, you know what to replicate, what to encourage, or otherwise. So, two very basic metrics, but honestly, quite magical when you sort of dig deeper into it. So, yeah. Awesome. So while Neha's trying to figure out the wheel of names, I would love for Subramaniam to unmute and ask his question also. You have had posted a bunch of questions. Why don't you shoot one of them for us today?